Hello and welcome to this week's HealthTech Hour on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. My name is Steve Roest, and each week we bring you the best news, views, and interviews with the CEOs, founders, and clinicians who are leading the health tech revolution in the UK and beyond. I am the CEO and founder of a health tech company myself, and I am passionate about the people and companies who are changing the world. This is our second show back after our little holiday break, and it's going to be an absolute cracker. Before we get to that, I just want to go through a little bit of business. Please make sure you follow us on the socials. It's at HealthTech Hour. Please follow the station, which is at UK Health Radio. We have a ton of new presenters on, all with great shows. Make sure you follow the station to see what's coming up. Now, regular listeners might remember a couple of months back, maybe 6 weeks ago, we had a show that was dedicated to social care, to the social care crisis, geared really around how technology was playing a part or could play a part in alleviating some of the problems. Fergus, who is the chairman of one of the leading social care companies in the UK, Digital Home Visits, came on, and he gave us a number of key insights into the social care crisis. For example, that there was already a shortfall of 45,000 carers prior to COVID, which then leapt up to 75,000 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Beds are being blocked. I think Fergus mentioned that over 1 million bed days per year were being blocked, primarily because people couldn't be released from hospitals into social care because there was no one to look after them. There were no carers. Since Fergus came on, a couple of things happened. The first was that we got a huge response to the social care show, probably the biggest response we've ever had to any show. And the second is that the government has introduced a law, which I think probably a lot of listeners will be aware of. It's been very heavily publicized, to enforce mandatory vaccinations in social care. So anyone that works in social care has to be double vaccinated, or had to have been double vaccinated, I believe, although Fergus will and Matthew will correct me, but by last week, which has made the staffing problem significantly worse. This mandatory vaccination issue has been discussed in the media, and so we thought that we would do a follow-up show on the social care crisis. So today is a social care special, and Fergus is back along with Matthew Dunster, who is the managing director of Digital Home Visits, a veteran in the social care sector. I can't wait to get into this because this is an issue that affects everyone listening. So we all have parents, aunts, uncles, family, friends that have either gone through the social care system or who will be going through the social care system. So it's very emotional, but it's also very relevant to everyone listening. So why don't we get started? Fergus, you've been on before, so I'm going to start with Matthew. Matthew, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good. Welcome to the show. Good. Fergus, how are you?
Terrific, thanks, Steve. You look like you've aged since I last saw you. What's been going on? How's it being a successful CEO of a tech company that's gone through a good funding round?
Well, I think you probably hit the nail on the head. I've aged since you last saw me. So, I think that probably says it all. But no, we're good. PocDoc's going well. We're cracking on. We've got work. We're working in polio. We're working in COVID. We're working on cardiovascular disease. There's a lot going on. So normally to the show, we have a 3-part structure, which is that, we go through the origins, and then we go through what's going on and so on. But we've got such a lot to unpack around this issue that I'm going to kind of go rogue. Ignore my production notes and just sort of, we're gonna do the show a little bit more freewheeling. So Matthew, I'd like to start with you for some context for myself and also the people listening. When and why did you become involved in the social care sector? What's the kind of origin story there?
So I became involved in 2005. So there was a small family business that was doing recruitment into the healthcare sector. And I joined this family business after a few years of sort of putting it off. The industry I was working in was going through a bit of a change, so I joined the family business and took the recruitment. I wanted to do temporary staffing for health. That's what I felt was it. And we had a very, very small, at the time, I think it turned over £7,000 a week or something like that, domiciliary care arm on that business. And I wanted to close it immediately because there was a lot of hassle, right? Giving people in care time. But fortunately, unfortunately, the demand just kept growing, and we just basically hit a bit of a run. And I brought some new ways of working to the company that I'd taken from sort of my experience in the sort of wider corporate world. We kind of grew quite rapidly, and we started winning public contracts. So that was when 16 years ago, and we just kept growing the domiciliary care business. And now we sort of have the reverse, where we have a very large domiciliary care business and a very, very small temporary staffing business. And earlier this year, the couple of the founders and me, we exited the group in terms of shares, and we exited to digital home visits. And as part of that arrangement, the digital home visits took over the care bureau, and I took over digital home visits, which was very exciting for me, because basically I'm interested in where it's going in the next sort of 20 years. There's a huge volume of people within social care who have a lot of experience, but a lot of them tend to be 5-10 years off retirement maximum. So I think where it's going in sort of the next 2 decades are more interesting, and that's why we took that jump there.
And what motivated you to get involved in the first place? Way back when?
I have to say I wasn't massively motivated to get involved. I wanted to close it straight away and do staffing, because staffing's much easier. You deliver people, and they do the thing. You'd have to get involved. What kept me in it was 2 or 3 things. One was working in certain sectors, corporate sectors I've worked before. I never, there was very much the people I got to work with very vanilla. They were the same type of people. They had the same type of background. They had the same type of education and stuff like that. Social care is a bit different. You've got in the management teams, you've got people without any formal qualifications in terms of management. They've come up through ranks of being carers and supervisors, managers. And so you get to work with a range of different people. That keeps me interested. The fact that I feel like I'm doing something that's appreciated on a wider scale is a big motivating factor to working to sort of leadership in social care. And then I think that, certainly in the last sort of, even before, but in the last 10 years, there's been a real sort of drive to bring this sector to the forefront. So look at how it works operationally, look at how it works technologically, look at how it's commissioned. And it's obviously the overlaps between social care and healthcare have got more and more, and they've integrated more and more. And I think that's an interesting space to be in, because we can rely on one thing. We can rely on people getting older, and we can rely on people becoming unwell. And I think in that we can rely on that is going to be something that's going to require a challenge that's interesting space to work in.
I think that makes sense. And what at the time when you started, what were the key things that you sort of immediately noticed about the space that might have been unexpected, or could you give us a flavor of what it was like back then versus now, sort of like a comparison? Because I'm assuming some things may have changed beyond out of sight, and some things may have not changed at all. So I'd just be interested to hear what what your thoughts are.
So in 2005, when I started, a lot of local authorities, because they commissioned this social care, they didn't have structured contracts necessarily. This is something they were really looking towards in the sort of early 2000s and late 2000s. It was a different. The people you were looking after were far less complex than they are today. So the barrier to get funded social care in 2005, 2006 was very, very low. There was very limited payments from their side, from the individual side, in contributions, and what we used to call cups of tea brigades. So that there were people that just required checking on. Go in, check they're all right, check they were healthy, make them a cup of tea, make sure they're eating. Go out. Anyone who had a lot more requirements were in residential care, and people who needed more requirements that were in nursing residential care. But over the period of time, interesting statistic is there's fewer people in funded social care now than there was 10 years ago, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, because
you mean on an absolute basis or on a percentage of the population base?
No, on an absolute. So fewer people have funded social care, but the people who are in it are massively more have their needs are massively more complex. So the barrier to get the social funded care is it has gone up and up and up.
Right.
The complexities of the contracts, what you need to operate within them, has gone up and up and up. Yet still, it seemed to be 10 years ago that there was going to be it was a hugely fragmented market, which was right for sort of the merger and acquisition model, and a lot of people were assuming that the market would be dominated by maybe 5 to 10 large players. That didn't really pan out, because if we think all the way back to 2010 and the start of sort of what the government austerity and things like that, then that meant that spending per capita, and actually the numbers of capita they were spending on, was going down and down and down, and that basically forced prices down, forced ways of purchasing into more and more competitive angles, and that forced some of the bigger operators like Allied Healthcare, if you call them, to sort of crash. And what it's led to is we've still got an 80% of domiciliary care providers are independent, small, single site operations, probably less than £1 million turnovers, and then there's probably like 15 larger players, and then there's a chunk of middle players, but there's no lack of drive towards trying to solve the problems of the lack of supply, but there's definitely some really harsh barriers in front.
But I think Steve, one of my observations, and as you know, I'm not from the healthcare sector. You and I both know that because we used to work together. But one of my observations as an outsider looking in was we met quite a few domiciliary care providers, and there is definitely a generational piece here where there is a premium on owner directors who are of a age band like Matthew, who know the business inside out, know how it operates, and there's so many unseens in that world, but also understand what the future needs to look like and how the world of technology and data and innovation can work within what can be quite difficult constraints of the social care sector. And that's why we were so excited to meet Matthew for the first time, because we felt like that convergence was really important to the future of the category, and something that actually wasn't as widespread as you would hope. And then really, as we kind of in this conversation start to talk about where we are today and what the future looks like, being able to bridge the reality of the system and then what the future technologies can bring to improve it is going to be critical to everyone.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's not just in this sector that the increasing digitization of healthcare. I mean, that's why we're doing what we're doing at PocDoc, because the healthcare across the board has embraced digitization. That genie's not going back in the bottle. It's really the only way to deliver healthcare at a cost that is acceptable to governments and taxpayers, and deliver the quality of care to meet the demand, or even go part way to meeting the demand. So yeah, we're going to get into all of that. Don't worry. But Fergus, what I think will probably be helpful at this point, could you just, for the listeners, summarize the last show that we had, the key takeaways, because I think that you could probably give us a bit of a kind of point of order as to what was discussed last time, and then we can kind of move on as to what actually has changed, because it's gotten worse, if anything, which I want to kind of go into.
Yeah, so last time we chatted, which I enjoyed hugely, actually, Steve.
Well, you're back, so I assume you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's for the fame, Steve. But the last time we chatted, we explained about the origins of digital home visits and how we thought that we could create an app that would improve the efficiency of carers to get to beneficiaries faster and more accurately. And actually, as we got into the industry and when we invested in the company and we created a company, we realized that wasn't the problem. And the problem was, as you outlined at the top of the show, that there just aren't enough people to deliver the care. And Matthew describes it as it's a kind of a supply-led market, in that there are more than enough people who need care, but there are seriously not enough people to deliver it. And the numbers you hit at the top of the show, which was 45,000 shortfall of carers in the UK pre-COVID, 70,000 plus post-COVID, just gives you an idea of the scale of the problem. And we said, wow, no bit of kind of incremental technology that gets someone to a care project sooner is going to solve that problem. There was a huge labour deficit. And really, what can solve that? It's either government policy and private sector technology innovation. And I think we need to lay as many bets as possible, because, you know, you cannot get away from the crisis that is on show. And you talked about bed blocking, and bed blocking is a really serious issue. And in that, it was actually 2.5 million days of bed blocking, and that was pre-COVID. God knows what it is now. But, you know, the issue is that the hospitals will patch you up and get you to able-bodied. But if you need to have care, they will only release you if there is an allocated carer. And if you have a shortage of 70,000 care staff, there are a lot of people who just don't have access to care, which means they're stuck on the hospital bed, which means that other people can't get that hospital bed, which means other people's procedures are postponed. I saw a stat today that it's a 2.5-year waiting list for a lot of procedures at the moment because of the shortage of staff and bed blocking. And you know, that becomes really real when you add in a pandemic where you've got a serious surge in demand for hospital beds. So what we looked at was like a kind of confluence of issues that was putting massive pressure on the state system, huge pressure on individuals. And in fact, I saw a stat the other day, I haven't validated it. It was something like, if you calculated the cost of the care that families give to family members, it's something like 45 billion in the UK.
Wow.
You had to bill that out.
Like,
yeah.
So that's sort of like an unseen cost.
Yeah, and look, I don't know if we should see looking after our family as a cost. Maybe that's exactly what we should be doing. But just the point is, like, this issue is getting bigger and bigger. And so where we got to in the last show was, how do you release that bottleneck? And if the government can magic up 70,000 work visas, that would be amazing. Or 70,000 people to do the jobs, that would be good. But then we have to look at the private sector and go, okay, well, what can we do to innovate, to stop people falling into the clinical care or acute care space? What can we do to keep people healthier longer so that there isn't this jamming of the bottleneck? And there are many private sector businesses like Babylon, who have recently listed, who have looked at developing technologies for the privately funded sector that can make a difference to demand. And, you know, obviously they've got enormous scale because COVID hit and everyone was into remote doctor access. But the private sector will deliver the innovation. Fundamentally, it's the government who will then extrapolate that into the nation, bearing in mind 80% of dom care is government funded. So that's where we got to last time. And I think we left it on a positive note. I think we started saying, crikey, this is the unknown crisis that people haven't really got their under the skin of yet. And we left it saying, but look, there is future here. Britain is an absolute foundry of creative innovation using technology. We've seen that in fintech and other categories. The healthcare space in the UK is ripe. And as you know, Steve, I'm on the board of a digital healthcare venture capitalist fund, and never has there been such excitement in digital healthcare at the moment. And we've got a government that is recognizing the issue. And we saw a pledge of 35 billion that they put in a couple of months ago. We talked about how that doesn't really scratch the surface, but we can see in the media, we can see that this is a major issue. And with elections coming up, we know that governments need to make action. That's where we left it in the last show.
Well, look, on that point, we're going to take a short commercial break. We'll be back in 2 minutes with Matthew Dunster and Fergus from Digital Home Visits. And Matthew, I would like it after the break if you can bring us up to speed on the mandatory vaccinations and why that's exacerbated this staffing problem. So we'll be back in 2 minutes.
How good are vitamin C supplements? Usually only a small proportion of vitamin C actually reaches your cells and has a positive effect. Whereas the high absorption levels of Goldman Laboratories liposomal vitamin C help maintain optimal vitamin C levels in your body and strengthen your immune system. Now get 10% off when you choose Goldman Laboratories liposomal vitamin C capsules. Just quote 10 off at goldmanlaboratories.com. Effective treatment of pain is now available in the UK. The results of a double-blind trial has shown that Big Cure Laser offers a significant reduction in pain compared to the placebo group. To get your special Big Cure offer now, call free on 0808 501 5122 or Pro London. Big Cure Laser. Big Cure Laser.
Welcome back to this week's HealthTech Hour with Matthew Dunster and Fergus from Digital Home Visits. We are unpacking the social care crisis today. It's a whole show dedicated just to this as a social care special. So just before the break, Fergus got us up to speed on where we were prior to the mandatory vaccination law that came in. And Matthew, I just would like to kind of pick that up with you now. I know you've got some thoughts on it, obviously, as a leader, a veteran leader of the industry, owner, manager of care homes and service providers. So what has happened around this mandatory vaccination issue within the sector that's exacerbated the staffing problems and kind of, some people say, I don't know whether you would concur, has made the problem worse, not better?
Well, in July, the government passed a law that everyone in a care home should be vaccinated in terms of all the frontline staff, and it's easy to see why. There was a huge problem with the care homes got very, very badly hit during COVID, and it made sense. And anyone looking in from the outside was probably going to accept that that's probably a good idea. If these people are working with these vulnerable, they should be vaccinated. So they brought that in July, excuse me. And I think at the time, most people were expecting there to be a labour shortage was far off anyone's mind. So I don't think it was heavily fought against, because most care home operators probably thought, well, labour is going to be quite plentiful in the next sort of half of this year as we roll off furlough and things like that. But what's happened is about sort of 16 to 20% of those care home staff are not vaccinated. And they had until November, this week, until to have both jabs done, and if not, they couldn't work in any patient-facing role, and that includes people who are, receptionists and anyone else that might come across care home residents. Now, I'm talking about care homes, and we're not involved with care homes, and the reason that is because when we talk about social care, a lot of people from the outside and the media as well only think about care homes. Yeah. They don't think about the wider issue of the care at home, or home care, or domiciliary care, as we call it. And it's odd because actually it's about twice as big.
Is that right?
There
Wow.
are about 500,000 just short of 500,000 care home residents in the UK, as opposed to nearly 1 million people who are providing some sort of home care service.
Wow, I didn't
realize
that.
And that's a trend that's probably, I mean, I haven't got the historicals, but there'll be at some point there'll be a cross in that graph, and that's only going to get more diverse because the care home is not the way that the government wants to fund, and residential is not the way that people want to fund. They want to fund everyone in their own home as far as possible. So, and that reflects that what people are telling them as well. Most people want to stay in their own home. They don't like to go into care homes. Often the relatives would like them in a care home because then they don't have to worry about anything. But the individual themselves, and there's a lot of evidence to say that people do better in their own homes. They do better. The sort of, once you start looking after someone on that scale, they tend to decline faster as they do less and less for themselves. Now that brings us to speed with the vaccines, and that's where we are with the care homes at the moment. And like I say, now they've got an interesting point, which is at the moment they can identify as not being able to have the vaccine, so they can basically sign a self-declaration. That ends on the Christmas Eve, on the 24th of December. From the 24th of December, there will be apps or ways that they will have to prove vaccination status. At the moment, they have to prove vaccination status or sign a self-declaration, and the care home operator is not obliged to check upon this self-declaration. Okay. They're not obliged to look at it. That's given them a sort of, I reckon, a sort of a cushion to the impact. Yeah, because
that's like a slow glide flight path in, isn't it? Let's be honest. I mean, sort of like a bit of a loophole until it gets shut off on the 24th of December.
That's right, and then we'll have to see what the compliance levels are like, because it's going to take an amount of time for the regulator, the Care Quality Commission, to work out a way of regulating that. How do you store that data? How is it held? And how do we check?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. It'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of now what's happened in the last few weeks. It's been publicised is the health secretary, Jared Savage, has had basically given his indication that he is going to take to Parliament and roll out the same rule for all NHS and social care staff. So that will cover all NHS staff in hospitals, in any residential settings, and all staff that deliver anything to people's own homes, and all people who might come in contact with those people. So that will cover receptionists, that will cover the people who come in and do the hairdressing in the care home, anything like that.
Well, and so, also, sorry, just to jump in, it will cover anyone that looks after anybody in any capacity in that person's own home. Is that correct?
Yes. So basically,
yes. So if any aspect of social care anywhere would require a full vaccination.
Yeah. So anything that's regulated, as in, so social care is regulated by the Care Quality Commission. If you go into someone's home and do some cleaning for them, that's not a regulated activity. If you go and do personal care or help assist with feed them or medication, that becomes regulated. So anyone doing that regulated activity. And then of course on the residential side, you've got those are regulated locations. So a hairdresser that has care home residents to their hairdressers busting won't have to do it, but if they send the hairdresser to the residential home, the hairdresser has to be vaccinated. Now, wherever your opinions on vaccinations are, is it, for me, I think vaccination is a good idea. I think everyone should have them. However, we are conscious that throughout the sector, there's something in the region of sort of 76% of people who work in the domiciliary care sector have been vaccinated, so which leaves quite a big gap of 20-something% where they haven't got both vaccinations. Vaccinations have been around a long time now. It's not like people are being waiting to be called forward. If that goes through Parliament, if it doesn't get objected, if it doesn't get softened, if it doesn't get things, then you could have a sector in April the 1st, which is when it's being posited to bring in, that 10% of that domiciliary care sector is no longer able to service those individuals. And if that happens, and it won't be uniform, by the way, it won't be 10% of each domiciliary care service, because different areas of the country, different dynamics, different socioeconomic groups of employees have different vaccination levels. So you can find areas where it goes up to sort of 40%, 50% unvaccinated.
What is interesting about that, Matthew, is that if you look at the data that's recently published, 90% of the NHS workers, 90, have had double vaccinations. Versus,
I think it's slightly more actually. Probably, it's about 92,
versus the 75% of the dom care space that have had both doses. So there is already a lag, right? And then if you start to put the maths on it, you go, well, there's about, what is it, Matthew? It's about 4 times more dom care workers than there are care home workers in the UK. And
it's about not quite, but it's twice as many.
Twice as many,
yeah,
and
because a dom care worker looks after more people than a single dom care worker covers more people than a single care home worker, right? Because care home are limited 22 beds and things like that. Yeah, so you end up with your average dom care worker will have as many, could have 20 customers a week. Yeah, depending upon what they did different to people, and obviously there's more people that have those that feed into that. But a care home tends to have fewer carers per resident, just because of the way the dynamics are, right? But the problem is it's a supply-led industry already, and this is what I keep coming back to. And this vaccination, if and when that comes in, and even now, it's going to cause ripples, right? Just announcing it, but it's not like, I mean, I don't quite understand. They sort of say, well, we'll announce this now, and then we'll expect people to have that done by March the 31st, or we'll deal with the problem March the 31st. I mean, the reason it's March the 31st, by the way, April the 1st is the change day, is because they thought they didn't want to introduce it over winter pressures, which is an amazing arrogance, really, to think that you're telling a bunch of people that they're not got a job in a few months, but by the way, guys, stick around, right? Because
and not
Yeah.
just stick around, but like really put the nose to the grindstone for the next few months.
Stick around for the
hardest winter.
Yeah.
And then look, if you don't want to, you can go off if you know if when you want to. So with this whole vaccination area, how well consulted do you look? Again, I don't, this isn't about whether or not we think vaccinations are a good thing or a bad thing.
Sure.
Obviously, I think they're a good thing. I'm sure people have their own reasons, but how consulted was your industry about this particular area? Because irrespective of it sounds like what you're saying, which I think makes some sense, which is irrespective of where you stand personally on vaccinations, this is going to have a monumental impact on staffing and therefore care. So at what point did you get brought into that conversation, or not really at all?
So there hasn't been a lack of consultation. There's been huge volumes of consultation. There was a whole 6-week consultation where a lot of online forms were requested and things like that, and a lot of completion, and it was well attended as far as these consultations go. The consultation evidence is quite clear. That 60-something% of social care managers don't think this is a good idea. 80% of the public don't think it's a good idea. There is no majority that think of subsectional group that thinks this is a good idea. And here it's odd because the consultation results are very clear.
Right.
If you just went off the consultation. Now, granted, what I don't know, and I have no way of knowing, or I don't have the time to research this, well, what happens if you don't vaccinate these people? How many more people are likely to end up in hospital as a result?
Mm-hmm.
But just as a straw poll, I'd be surprised if it's more than the response of taking away 10% of NHS staff. Because even if you take away 5%, right, that means 95% to deal with what is going to be over 100% need this winter. Are those 95% going to stick around, or are they going to, are you going to end up with a sort of tipping scale where the closer people are to the stress level, the further they fall off the scale, and it drives the scale up, and it just becomes a cycle. And that can certainly happen in all social care and domiciliary care, because it's not like a shop that's busy and it's a busy day on tills, but people have to wait, right? You can't not provide the care visits on a Sunday evening. You can't say, do you know what, actually we're understaffed, so we're not going to do as much this week. That's not the way it happens. So it falls to those people who are still there. And of course, the more stress you put on them, then the worse they get. And in some ways, savvy care providers will know that the best thing they can do at a time like this is hunker down and get rid of, but it's a bad phrase, but hand back as much work as they can. Because they know it's going to fall over. They know it's going to be problematic. They'd rather keep their staff free from stress as possible,
right?
And then
so they make so you think there's a risk that they will make an early decision to sort of proactively say, we don't want to do this bit anymore, and push it back on the local authority, which then obviously creates a problem as to where that goes in a market with declining resources, right? Like if so just to go back a slight step, because it sounds like a lot of the discussion around this topic is sort of the mandatory vaccinations will force 10%, or depending on where you get your numbers from, 10% of the workforce out of the workforce, whether it be social care or NHS or whatever. Is there any, and again, I don't, you might know, and I'm not asking you to, give away any confidentiality or any personal information, but is there any of those 10% or however many things, do you believe that are they so entrenched in their views, that 10%, that this just won't motivate them, they would actually leave? Or is there some kind of percentage that will actually, this is the final stick or carrot that they need? Or are we way past that, because we've been talking about
we've run this experiment already. We've run this experiment with the care homes. So we've been in a situation where the care homes have X percentage unvaccinated. It's made clear to them that if they're unvaccinated, they lose their jobs at this date. Yeah. We did talk about how we've got that sort of self-declaration type thing. So that does sort of soften the figures and make them a little, create some noise around them. But the numbers that I've seen there, and again, it would be best if people are listening to this to double check on their own state. But as I understand it, about 45%, somewhere between 40 and low, high 40% have been vaccinated after being given this ultimatum. So for every 10 people that are in that boat at the moment, only 5 are going to get on and stay on. The rest are getting off, right? So, and if we were in the scenario we thought we might be in, I think most people earlier on this year were predicting high unemployment rates, and we were predicting recruitment was going to be a relatively easy task. That's not happened. Yeah. There's massive labour shortages, and it's not just our industry; it's across the board. Means that these people can go and get other jobs really easily.
Well, so I had a question about this. Because again, there's a lot of around this industry around it being supply led, and there being a staff shortage. And so, what would the ideal pull factors for you to be pulling more people back into this industry? What would that have to look like to bring more people back? Is it improved working conditions, pay? I don't know. There could be lots of different things, but what would those pull factors in an ideal world be?
I think you have to answer that question properly. There's 2 things. One is you have to take note of the current situation and recognize that it's not normal, right? So the fact that there's not enough butchers, and the fact there's not enough lorry drivers, the fact there's not enough of a lot of people, there's not like bars haven't got enough people. That will pass eventually. But even if you go back, take all that noise out, then you'd have to go back to understand how domiciliary care, how home care is often commissioned by local authorities. And that's a sort of conversation that leads you on to understand why domiciliary care companies pay in the manner they pay. And it's all to do with the sort of unit-based commissioning of care. So they will want to, so a local authority it's got a legal obligation to look after someone and make sure that they're looked after. They will want to pay for that in the most efficient way possible. So they might, from their perspective, they might say, well, this individual needs 8 hours of care a week or 7 hours of care a week, let's say, 2 half-hour visits a day. We shall therefore pay 7 hours, and we will therefore locate a care company and we want to basically buy 7 hours of care. And the problem is that means that we're going to pay them on each visit. When they go into hospital, we're not going to pay the care provider if they don't need the visits. So we're not going to pay the care provider. So
instead of it being, so it's a bit more pay as you go sometimes, as opposed to steady.
But not even a bit more. It's totally. Yeah. So this is how local authorities do these contracts. And of course, if you're there, they're their monopoly, right? They're the key buyer. So they control it. Yeah, the revert the monopoly, isn't it? Things they control the buy. So they're basically, there's firms in there, and if you don't want to sell at their market, if you don't want to sell at their market store, then you don't have a choice. You either close or accept the contract. And going back to our 80% of those single operations, sort of family run, maybe small operate, that's a very difficult decision for them to make. They can't pick up their care force and go over the border and work in another local authority. If they're based in Worcestershire, they're based in Worcestershire. They can't go, well, do you know what, Somerset looks like a better gig, let's go there.
Yeah,
let's take in the same way you can with other things. And that, once you understand that explains how domiciliary companies pay and how the job works, and goes a long way to understanding why it's not as attractive as it could be. Because basically we're talking about paying people for visits of care and saying, we'll pay you for each individual visit. In the same way that Amazon might pay for each individual parcel, stuff like that.
Or like if Uber pay per ride, kind of.
Yeah. So and the reason is because if we took another approach, which was to say, well, let's employ people and then we'll do the visits, and by employ people on a block of hours and then we'll do the visit, that's a big risk, because if we end up with too many visits, not enough staff, then we're going to end up cramming them. If we end up with too many staff, not visits, then we're going to go out of business next week. So the only way to do it is because it's not a population base, but that's how it's come about. And because it's got here,
it's so complex, this issue.
Yeah, because it's got here, how do you then untangle that? And it's very, very difficult, because you can't stop it. You can't put this on hold. You can't say, right, we're going to stop doing it for 4 weeks while we come up with something else.
Well, look, I think what we're going to do now, we're going to go stop for another commercial break. And then afterwards, you spoke at the beginning of the show about you got into this because you had a vision for the next 20 years. So let's hear that vision and let's understand how we're going to integrate, or you're going to integrate technologies. I know we talked about that in our pre-production call. How can that alleviate some things so we can look at the future? So yeah, we'll be back in 2 minutes.
Light is the quantum energy emitted from the universe, from the sun and stars. Now, Tom Palladino, a humanitarian and scalar light researcher, has created the world's only scalar light viewing system, a system that can bring long-distance healing and wellness to humans, pets, and plants via a photograph. Get your free 15-day trial now at scalarlight.com or click on the Scalar Light banner on the UK Health Radio website. Shields like masks are top of mind right now, but did you know you have inner armor working constantly to protect you from pathogens? It keeps you healthy and thriving. It's your immune system. Ion Gut triggers the body's natural ability to support gut strength all year long, so your immune system can protect you when you need it the most. Treating your inner armor. Visit uk.ionbio.com to learn more. Ion Gut. Protect what protects you.
Hello and welcome back to the final part of our social care special. Get that out. On this week's HealthTech Hour with Matthew Dunster and Fergus from Digital Home Visits. So previously in the show, we were going over some of the areas, some of the issues. Obviously, this whole area is extremely complicated, extremely complex with lots of interlocking parts. But at the start of the show, Matthew said that one of the reasons why you got into this area was because you had a vision for how it could be. So, and I want to bring in the technology aspects as to how that could help as well. So I kind of asked the open question, Matthew, what is that vision that you have for the next 20 years in this space?
I think it's a very wide question. I think.
Sorry, I put you on the spot
okay.
there slightly.
Okay. I think there's this sort of breaks down into sort of 3 or 4 different areas that you can broadly categorize things for. I think there's what I refer to as the sort of moonshoot type technologies. These are the sort of preventative measures. How can we prevent people from going to hospital? How can we know that they're getting ill before they get ill, etc.? And how can we monitor them electronically and things like that, which sounds quite basic when you sort of sit down around a boardroom and discuss it. It sounds like a great thing, but it's an incredibly tough nut to crack, and it's going to require lots of sort of innovation and thinking. And it's not even just like if you can come up with the technology. The whole that's almost like an easier bit. The whole outlay, the whole rollout of this, and the whole sort of the structure that it fits into with health spending, local authority spending. Having 130, people talk about the home care market. There's not a home care market in the UK. There's 137 individual home care markets because there's each one run by a different local authority on slightly different terms. There is a sort of whole sort of long-term aspect in terms of how we can do it, but the technology is not going to get people up in the morning, and it's not going to get them out of bed. I think even Fergus will admit that we're a fair way off that.
We can get them up in the morning, Matthew. We can get them up in the morning. We can set alarms.
Yeah. Well, we haven't got the robots that, and that's what ultimately we lack, right? We lack human capital in this thing. So we need to find ways of preventing people from getting to needing that human input as much, and making the human input that we do have more valuable. And I think there's a bunch of people working on stuff, and we're working on stuff around that. And I think it's all gonna sort of come to fruition, but it's not going to be in the next 12 months, right? Where no one's going to come up with a eureka moment of it's unlikely. But it's there, and it will be in the future.
So I think what I would add to that is fundamentally the vision has to be, how do we create a system where the population can get access to a positive care experience, which is staffed at the various phases of their needs. Whereas at the moment, the system is set up that you have an acute issue, you go into the social care system, and you immediately need quite a lot of social care. And that creates this bottleneck, and this bottleneck is what has a huge societal impact as well as a system impact. And the danger here is that people think that you can disrupt the healthcare system. You know, as Matthew has really helpfully articulated, the healthcare system is really complicated, and it's got lots of legacy structures and issues and protocols, and the way that the money is spent by the government system is really, really complex. So someone with a random piece of technology isn't going to blow that all up in the way that Uber kind of completely changed how we think about transport. And so it has to be about looking at the full social care experience, from preventative care to acute experience to domiciliary care to care home experiences, and see where are the strategic opportunities to introduce technology to make it better. And that's about alleviating the bottleneck. It's about improving access to care, improving the labor force. And as Matthew has rightly said, it's not a silver bullet. There's an enormous amount of opportunity across the entire supply chain of social care to improve it. And that's where kind of you take hardware, you take data, and you take domiciliary care provision, like, you know, as Matthew's described, the integration of those three things will improve the quality and access.
The reference to Uber is really interesting for two reasons. One is the whole concept of Uber is not, it's not that revolutionary, right? You've got an app that you book taxis. That's what it does. Uber was successful on the basis where it's pouring money, but also, you know, the infrastructure for Uber had to be there for Uber to be successful. If we weren't all running around with smartphones, Uber wasn't successful. If we couldn't have all the if we didn't have a whole load of 4G data points and 3D data points, Uber wasn't successful. If we didn't have all the fintech that sits behind it, Uber's not successful. There's a number of things that need to be in place, and there's no different to any other market. In the healthcare market, it's more complicated to introduce them. And the other thing is that people look at the Uber success and think, well, it's matching. It's basically we've got a demand, we've got a supply. What we've done is matched it, and that's where we should look at. And a lot of care applications have tried that. We're going to match you with the carer that you really want. We're going to have a product matching process. That really only works when there are a lot of suppliers and the demand and supply roughly, roughly match, or supply out seats.
Yeah.
And for someone,
a lot of those. Sorry, go on. I was going to say, I've seen a lot of those type of, marketplaces for carers, marketplaces, and it's like, well, that's kind of all well and good, but if you don't have the liquidity there, like what are you, how are you, Uber worked because they could flood the market with thousands and thousands of taxis. So there was always one available within 5 minutes, and therefore the price came down. But having a marketplace where you can't find anyone because there's no one to find, that's not going to, and also providing a marketplace to more efficiency match people really doesn't address the major structural issues in the market, from what I'm hearing from you.
No, that's right. And somebody who lives slightly out in the countryside, when I need to get an Uber, right, they're not always, they're not always there. Yeah, and I'm sitting there for a while. But
you know what? What
watching the cars cancel. But
what will make a difference is if less people fall into the social care system at an acute level. If you can keep people in a healthier state at home before they need care services funded by the government, then you will ease the system. So that's where you get into this interesting preventative care space. Now, clearly, there's a labour force piece, which is a government policy led, which will be how much can we pay carers, and can we increase their pay in order to get more carers? That's a government policy issue, and the private sector, we can't affect that. We can inform on it, but we can't drive that. We can't wait for it either. What we can do is go, right, well, what technologies can we bring in that understand how people are living right now and can identify issues before they become acute, or provide services to keep people healthier at home for longer? And that's that preventative care space. And I think that's where it becomes really, really interesting, particularly if we've seen that people are willing to spend 25 quid for a 15-minute consultation with a GP over their phone. I appreciate that's not the mass market, but it's still a lot of people, and particularly post-COVID. You're going to see consumption behavior change to saying, okay, well, what can I use technology for at home to address some of my health needs before it becomes acute? And I think that's where you'll see society shifting away from the bottleneck. And if society shifts away from the bottleneck, the system just evens out a little bit. It's not the magic button, but it's a solution.
And with digital home visits, is it your role to be driving driving that adoption of those assistive technologies, or is this more of just something you personally feel strongly about? Like where does that responsibility lie across this sector, do you think? Because I agree with Fergus, which is that anything that can be, I mean, that's what PocDoc's all focused on is preventative health and helping people live healthier lives. And by definition, the longer you can keep people at home, the better. And if you can prevent them becoming sick, the better. But what's your view about the role that a company such as yours plays in that fight, so to speak?
Well, our vision is to give a better quality of care to the elderly and the vulnerable. So we want to continually to improve that. And I think if we were to limit ourselves just to government-funded domiciliary care contracts, I think that's really tricky because 80%, that's government funded. You're relying on one customer who's going to inform the dynamics of the market. They're going to dictate it. But we have to have a wider aperture. So we have to look at the full journey that a beneficiary of care goes through. And at what stages can we make an active influence on? And that's why we think preventative care is a really, really interesting space to do so. For the government-funded care contracts, we will inform and influence the government as much as possible, but fundamentally they will make the call. And it would be naive of us to sit here and say, increase wages by 3x in the next 6 months. We don't have the power to do that, but we do have power to affect beneficiaries before they hit those government contracts. So I think history shows, Steve, and that's why you're doing so well with PocDoc, which is it's the private sector that drives innovation and it's the public sector that drives adoption. So, our role as technology-enabled companies is to identify the strategic weaknesses in the system, innovate using our knowledge in data and technology and the care system to create solutions that once validated, the government can adopt and deploy at scale. And I think it's not just us, it's everyone in this sector it will be thinking the same.
I think that makes sense. Matthew, one question for you in your experience. Yep. Oh, sorry, go on. Carry it. No, go for it.
I was just going to pick up what Fergus is saying. I think digital. So where we've got to with DHV is we've done a lot of research on the sort of, we spent a lot of time looking into solutions for the sort of like the disruptor, the Eureka type, and looking at preventative care and looking at those models and things like that. And what we found is that, the structure is not quite there. So if I can stretch this Uber analogy, we haven't quite got all the 3G posts and the smartphones that everyone, the government aren't ready to adopt that. What they are looking at is more incremental, right? Because there's a huge gap between a monitoring device, let's say, that's going to monitor someone at home that could be used which is basically a sort of glorified baby monitor, to a device which is going to predict whether someone's going to go have a chest infection. These are the differences is vast between a medically sort of device, but that will be that will be things that happen. So we're adopting sort of a multi-faceted approach to it, and we have those things there, but we're also looking at what the government is trying to do, because at the end of the day, they're the leader. The private market is buoyant, but it's often oversubscribed in terms of developers who are sitting in rooms sort of thinking about what the healthcare space might need, and without actually ever going to ask the healthcare providers or the buyers, what do you want? For example, a good one I had the other day was, I was talking to somebody about how you can get blood pressure monitors at home, and it will basically ping the blood pressure to the GP every how often. And it sounds great. It sounds like a great idea. We're going to prevent loads of stuff. But if you go and ask a set of GPs, do you want everyone in your town's blood pressure every 15 minutes? They'll probably say no, thank you. Because actually, if we took all the blood pressures, we'd probably find that a lot of us are over the 120/80 advisory limit. But actually, if you went to see a GP about it, so well, okay, let's monitor it. And it's that sort of thing. What do you think about it? So when we talk about sort of home monitoring solutions, how we there was a sort of need that local dom care providers will buy this, because then they'll get more local authority contracts, because they'll be able to deliver better services. The fact is, we're in a supply-led industry. The dom care providers don't need to do this. Why would they need to bring this technology on board? They just tell the local authority, no, the local authorities don't have a choice. They still have to use them because they can't stop the service. But I think there's a move towards, and I talked about this sort of care by numbers, care by task and time, care by 8 hours, 7 hours, whatever it is. There's a move away from that to make it more efficient, and there's a technology that can drive that, or at least assist it. And I was talking about the groups. We're talking about sort of like where people are looking at outcomes-based care and strength-based approach and things like that. And how can you make that person's life better rather than go, oh, you need 7 hours of care? Yeah, because that's not really the way you would adopt anything else, is it? I mean, you don't go to a hairdresser's and go, right, I've got half hour of haircut and go. Yeah. It's not how the most basic things work, but that's the way system. So those systemic changes, the tech is going to have to come in and support those. How do you monitor that stuff? How do we look at those people? How do we record what is going on in their lives? How do we integrate stuff to give that person a better outcome? And also, as we know, a massive problem is how do you place all these resources? You've got limited care resources, there's unlimited ones. How can you place them? And at the moment, it's massively inefficient. Some people have too little, some people have too much. Some people don't have any at all. And how you get to that stage of giving the commissioners and the people responsible the information and the things they can look at to make those decisions more elegantly, that is the big piece of tech development that is being overlooked, because a lot of people are in a room going, wouldn't it be great if we could monitor whether someone's about to fall over? And it would be great, but so would flying cars and lots of other, and my kids doing their homework on something. All of it, the stuff, it's going to take a while.
Your point is valid, which is that if you're going to, have something that detects whether someone could fall over or something like that, then there needs to be someone at the other end of that pipe who can take an action immediately to then prevent that. So sort of you need the full, I think what you're saying, which makes sense, is that before you can implement any of these things, you need to make sure that the full pathway is ready, right?
Yeah. And the funding is, and the way to fund it. How do you pay a provider to do that?
And look, and the bottom line is carers are leaving caring jobs to go and take jobs at Subway or in Amazon warehouses. And that's because they're paying better. And as much as someone is vocationally driven, we need to find a way to get these carers paid better, which is obviously government-led, so that we have the staff to be able to fulfill on all the needs that the technology might identify, which is why the government policy is such an important part of this. And we must there are people in the UK who will be willing to work for the right compensation. And that's a key that needs to be unlocked.
Great. Well, look, on that note, we've reached the end of the show, guys. I think we could do another hour. This area, I think, is really complex and there's a lot of stuff to unpack. So really thank you to both of you for coming on. Thank you for your candor and for explaining it to us, to myself and the listeners. I certainly learned a hell of a lot. So again, Matthew Dunster and Fergus Hay from Digital Home Visits, experts in the social care space. Thank you very much for coming on the show. I hope to hear from you again soon, maybe get you back on for a third hit. But yeah, thanks for coming on. And thanks to everyone for listening. We'll be back next week.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Steve.